Let me share my screen. So host disable attendee screen sharing. Is it possible to allow for me to share the screen? Okay, perfect. It's okay, mama. Venga. Sorry, my puppy needs to be with me whenever I talk.
Can we see your puppy?
Okay, perfect. Yeah.
Oh,
She's a very old Chihuahua. She basically rules my entire life. It's horrible. Okay, let me see how I can share this. Okay, perfect. It's that one. Okay. So the name for today's online knowledge share, it was how to heal, how plants heal us. And then I was like, oh, actually, I feel like we should talk about how we can heal land. So I think I'm going to share the screen. I'm just trying to figure out if I think Safari. Just give me 1 second. I don't know why it's not. Okay, there. And this is, oh my god. This is, hey ma. Can you all see anything? Does it is it like a Canva presentation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
Awesome, perfect. So yeah, this is a ridiculously long presentation. Of course, this is my actual workshop that I have on. Okay, so it's not going to be, this is an online workshop that I just had last week, but I'm going to use some of the slides to kind of talk to you all about how to help soil heal. And we can talk a little bit more about also how plants heal us, and like how it's a process that happens, it's like very much a relationship. But my name is Loba, and I'm a gardener, I'm a seed saver, I'm a full spectrum doula. I do a bunch of stuff. I'm based in Los Angeles. You can find more of my work at lobaloca.com, which is my website. I always get booked for workshops in universities and nonprofits around like feminism, queer stuff, queer ecology, self-care, community care, and all of that. I also have a Patreon that I share a lot of exclusive content. So if you're interested in learning more of what we talked about today, I have a lot of content in my Patreon. I also have an Instagram, Loba Loca shares. And if you have absolutely nothing to do and you just want to listen to a podcast or read it, we also have it transcribed. I have a Wild Weeds podcast, which is a really cool podcast that basically it talks about the relationships between each other, ourselves, and greater than human beings. And I'm really excited because this next podcast episode coming up, it's about mushrooms and mutual aid. So if you're interested on that, make sure to check it out. It's called Wild Weeds Podcast, and we're also on Instagram at Wild Weeds Podcast. So I'm just gonna go. This is a 75 slide workshop that was supposed to be an hour and a half, and it ended up being like 2 hours and a half because I always overdo everything. So I'm just gonna go very fast, just kind of like walk through it very, very fast. But this is also a workshop that I have online. So if you're interested in purchasing it, I have the link in my online store, which is my big cartel, lobaloca.bigcartel.com. And I have one coming up actually that's also sliding scale. So I'll talk more about that at the end. But just to start, I'm originally from southern coastal Peru. So how I work with land or how I plan out my yard is very much based on this model of chakra. So a chakra is a physical space, but it's also a spiritual space. like a spiritual space, spiritual growing space. So I wouldn't just say that it's a piece of land or that it's just a yard because it, or that it's just a garden, because it's very much physical, but it's also very like spiritual too. In a chakra or in a space of cultivation, a lot of times, specifically in the Andean culture, people do a lot of gifts to the earth. So I always like to start by saying that, because sometimes when we talk about chakra, is very similar to the idea of a milpa, right? So milpa is not just like a place where you grow corn, right? There's also a lot of like spirituality that goes with it. And also, just to me, gardens in general are very, very, they're just like so important when it comes to creating spiritual connections to our actual like what's around us, right? Our ecosystem, the plants, the seeds, the land that we're taking care of, and also, that sometimes when we're working with land and working to kind of like make a space produce food or produce medicine, or to plant natives and that, in that specific little bit of soil, there is so much to think about, right? Because it's not just about growing a garden. Sometimes, and we see it a lot, specifically in communities that are highly impacted by environmental racism, by white supremacy, gentrification, having a garden, or when you start seeing gardens popping up, that is a horrible way that like communities get displaced, right? So we see a lot of gardens or like cute things popping up, like a little garden shop over here, a little community garden, right? That is very much linked to gentrification. So I think it's also very important to understand that, yeah, like the ways that gardens have been used, especially in the context of like settler US, it's very much violent. And also, who gets access to that yard, like who are like the indigenous people of the land able to have access for land to grow their food and medicine, and they even able to go up in the mountains to gather their own medicine. Our Black folks that have been working that land and have basically created that entire city, are they even able to like access land and access medicine? So usually the answer is no, right? Even just the access to nature seems to be very much racialized, right? So who gets to go to nature, who feels safe in nature, is usually white people, middle class, or upper middle class people. So I also wanted to just mention that, because I think that when we think about yards and gardens and the healing land, there is also a huge conversation to have around just the privilege that we have to even be able to do that. And even in the healing community, or what is considered like the healing community nowadays, usually people that have access to medicine, people that have access to go to workshops on how to make medicine, people that have access to become herbalists, they tend to be folks that have a lot of resources, or a lot of like privileges that really allow them to do that, right? So I also wanted to mention that too, and even in the healing community, there's so much stuff that we have to talk about, and that's why also I think it's something that's been happening a lot lately, but it's also been happening way before this pandemic, is this push towards mutual aid, and this push towards kind of like really creating networks of support. There is beautiful chapters happening all over, to have folks start their own little garden at home. A lot of herbalists are coming together and really doing this beautiful work of making medicine for community, right? So here in Los Angeles, I'm part of the LA Herbalist Collective. You can check us out on Instagram, and even just like in my own work, like I've been doing that work of like trying to figure out how I can make medicine, how I can get medicine and give it out to folks that are not able to access it, because medicine is expensive, because it's a lot of work and a lot of money that goes into making medicine, right? So even just thinking about like having access to grow food, having access to grow medicine, having access to even like harvest that medicine, or even just be able to like purchase like a nice reishi tincture, right? It's something that not a lot of folks have access to, because of all of this just privileges that we have to work through. And let me see, do you want to talk about this? And then I also wanted to mention, since we are on the topic of this kind of this global pandemic that sounds like the apocalypse, I did want to also mention that a lot of us have survived many apocalypses, right? So like a lot of us have survived, and we're alive because of ancient networks of care. So mutual aid, and one of the issues that a lot of folks are having with how nonprofits, how different organizations are using this term of mutual aid or community care. Even Instagram was using the term community care, and I was like horrified by that. Is that a lot of times community care and mutual aid are very much terms like from radical communities, from like, you know, anarchist folks use it a lot, but also just people that have literally like survived because of mutual aid, because the government and the system doesn't give a fuck about them, right? So mutual aid and community care are very much ancient practices, that it's not just something that just started, right? Or that a nonprofit just recently started fundraising to like give out, I don't know, like $20 to people that need it, you know what I mean? Like it's very much like ancient practices of taking care of each other. And I also like to, you know, mention that even the way that nature works, like even if we're looking at, you know, new research on like how, for instance, like mycelium works, the way that nature redistributes nutrients, like from one tree to the other, right? Like that by itself is just like, oh shit, like mutual aid is very much natural and part of like the natural world. So I always, like, something that I've been working with a lot in my head, and the next episode in Wild Weeds actually talks about that, is the idea of the survival of the fittest, right? Because sometimes I think that people are so caught up in this idea that, you know, like Darwin, you know, he's like some kind of like whatever knowledge he produced is kind of like God sent, you know, and that the survival of the fittest, and that the first, you know, the people that are going to survive are the ones that are the strongest ones. And even if we look at nature, that's not even how nature works, right? Like nature is built on relations. And even just thinking about like our personal survival, like I cannot survive just by, you know, like accumulating all this wealth if I can depend on somebody to grow my tomatoes, right? Like, so it's very much like we live in community, and there's no way we can survive if we don't build that community, right? We can accumulate all the wealth, with all the wealth, all the fucking housing we want. We can basically like buy an entire city, but at the end of the day, like to survive, like you really need more than just money and accumulation of wealth, right? So also just thinking about the idea of like really thinking like, is that real? Is the survival of the fittest like a real thing? Like, you know, who made it up, and like who profits from us thinking that the survival of the fittest is an actual real theory, right? And why are we always learning from white men when we already know they don't know anything? Let me see the next one. Yeah. And then something that I've been actually really into lately has been soil. So soil is just basically like the foundation of life, right? We walk on soil. Like there is no way we can survive if there wasn't soil underneath us. Like even through the cement or through whatever, or the wood, if we're walking on, you know, wood, if the apartment we're on or if the house we're on has wood, there's probably cement in there, whatever foundation, right? We're always walking, or always being like the basic structure of life is soil, right? There is no way that we can do anything if we didn't have soil. We couldn't even stand somewhere if we didn't have soil, right? So soil is extremely important, and soil is very much alive, and the quality of soil is definitely at risk currently in this world, where you can honestly pollute miles of soil just by, you know, like letting some oil spill happen, right? So also just thinking about how like the foundation of life is currently being under attack, even through the pandemic, right? Even with this pandemic happening, there is still a bunch of you know, corporations that still have their terrorist groups out there trying to mine, trying to extract soil. We see it a lot with the tiny tiny house warriors in so-called Canada, right? So folks are still fighting, and indigenous folks are still fighting and protecting their territories. But yet again, all these mining companies, even in a global pandemic, are still, you know, trying to steal and pollute and you know, take over the land. We see it a lot even in the city. There is a lot of construction happening, a lot of luxury condos that are still happening in here in Los Angeles, for example. And you know, we're in a major global pandemic. Like clearly there's no investment in the health of the workers, but also like, wow, it's a global pandemic and people are still building luxury condos when there is like people in the streets, right? So even just thinking about like, you know, all of that, especially during these times. Soil is amazing. I can't clearly I was like way too into soil. This is why I spent forever. But I can't go through all of them, but if you're interested, I do have the recording of this workshop. But yeah, so something that I wanted to talk about today was about the idea of healing and like healing soil, and why it's so important to heal soil, to kind of in turn heal ourselves. So there's absolutely no way that we can think about health if we're not thinking about the health of the planet, the health of the water we're drinking, the health of the like indigenous people of that land, right? I'm currently in like Tombaland. Los Angeles is part of the land that the Tomba people take care of. So even just when thinking about like gardening, something that is very important for me to do is to even just plant some native California plants, right? So even especially in the context of Los Angeles, it's such a huge city that keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. And not only when we're thinking about gentrification, not only removing people out of their homes, but also removing greater than human beings out of their homes, right? So when you're doing construction, especially when the city is expanding, there is a lot of native flora that gets completely bulldozed, right? So I'm just really thinking about kind of like bringing in this ancient plants to this land back into the soil, and they grow so beautifully and so easy. So definitely encourage folks to see to know what territory you're on, who are the indigenous people of that area, but also what plants grow in that area and that you can maybe grow at home if that's possible for you. So soil, I mean, there's so much to say about soil, but the reason why I think it's so important to heal soil is because if we're going to be growing medicine, or we're going to be growing food, we need to make sure that our soils are good, right? So I don't know if folks have heard about how, like, for instance, a tomato, maybe like 100 years ago, a tomato, the nutritional value of that tomato is like way greater than a tomato grown currently today, right? Have you ever heard of that? And the reason why is because soil is not just like the place where the tomato grows, but it's also the place that all of these roots that kind of go into the soil are really kind of like sucking in a bunch of minerals and a bunch of just good stuff from the soil, and like giving it to us in the shape of a tomato, and we eat it, right? And it's nourishment, right? But if the soil is not healthy, if the soil is not well fed, then the quality of the tomato is not going to be the same, right? Because we're basically like, everything that we eat is based on the quality of the soil. There's this really sad story, actually. This guy that I met when I went to Mexico, like a couple of, oh my God, it was like 7 years ago. He was doing a documentary about this one piece of land somewhere in central Mexico that farmers started buying. Like, farmers were like, oh my God, everything grows so good here. Like, you could like put a seed and it would just like boom, like grow beautifully. But then a couple of years after, they realized that the reason why this tomatoes and these plants were growing so well is because it was basically being grown on poop from the city, from Mexico City. Like, I don't exactly know all of the details, but it was basically like the soil was being fed by like thousands of people's poop, right? Which it's also not that good. It's not that healthy. And I think there was some issues with like, the health administration. I think like E. coli was one of the main issues, and like people got super sick and the farmers lost all their money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But that's basically like a great example of how we are the soil that we eat from, right? So like really like the soil, like the plants that we're eating, like all the food that we're eating, it's also like the soil that our medicine is grown, our food is grown, is very important. So things that we can do to kind of feed the soil, especially we're talking about city soil that looks dead, soil that you kind of touch it and it just looks like there's no life. You don't see any sign of worms or any signs of any type of insect in it. Things that we can do even just at home. And the top right, there's my menstrual blood. And I always talk about this, and people sometimes are like, ah! And I'm just like, well, like, you can totally use your menstrual blood to feed the soil. Like, that's what I've done for years. And it's extremely like nitrogen rich, and like nitrogen is so good for plants, right? So I like to use menstrual blood a lot, especially when I moved into a new space. I'm always just like, putting it everywhere, like, dun, 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 dun. And also because if I don't use it in my soil, it's going to go into, you know, my toilet bowl, and that's gonna end up in the soil anyways. Like everything that we put in the toilet bowl, or that we, you know, put in the or that we put in the drainage, everything is gonna go back to the soil. And that's also one of the issues too with, you know, like when we're thinking about even the products that we're using to wash our hair, the makeup that we're using, the anything, the lotion, the sunscreen, like all of that goes back into the earth or into the ocean, right? So that's also why whenever I think about it, I'm just always like, okay, I need to stop thinking about it because I'm gonna lose it. But yeah, everything that we use, like everything that we do has such a huge impact in the world. For instance, there was this whole issue of the sunscreen, because the commercial sunscreen is filled with so much horrible stuff that people would, you know, like put it on their bodies and be like, okay, I'm gonna be healthy, like, you know, I'm not gonna get cancer because I'm like putting this sun lotion on, and then they would go into the waters, and because it's filled with chemicals, like the actual like living creatures in the ocean are dying because of like the type of sunscreen we're using, right? So even just thinking about that, right? So how can we think about health and like our health if we're not also thinking about the health of our entire planet? Like it's impossible for us to be healthy. It's impossible for us to talk about health if we're not also talking about, you know, like the health of our entire ecosystem. And things that we can do, you know, besides blood, which I know that might be a little bit too much for folks. You can also do worm casting, like worm bin composting at home. It's super easy. You can look it up in the internet. We won't have time to get into it today. You can also do like a DIY composting, which is direct into the ground. So this is an example of a ferment that went bad for me on the lower right, and it went bad, and I was like, I really don't want to throw it away because this is really good, like organic stuff, you know, and sometimes ferments go bad and like there's nothing you can do. So I was like, I really feel really bad throwing this even in the city compost, because the city compost sometimes is a mess. So I just made a hole and I just put the food in there and I covered it up. You know, you just want to make sure that that it's not easy for any other critters or for like creatures to get in it. But you can totally do that, you know, and you can start kind of feeding your soil by doing that. Even if you just live in like some random home or apartment and like the soil looks super dead, you can like collect your compost, you can put it in the freezer, and then once a week you can go down, make a hole. You know, you make a hole, you put the stuff in there, and then you cover it, and then that's gonna become dirt in like a couple of weeks, right? So that's a great way to do it. You can also, like, people honestly use pee. Like I've seen like people use their pee to like feed the soil, right? I don't know if folks, like in my case, like I've seen my dad pee on lemon trees for the lemons to fruit, and it actually worked, right? So it's really interesting too how we can use all of these bodily fluids to feed the soil. You know, at some point probably our bodies also fed the soil. I don't know how that's now, because honestly, like when we die, we're probably, especially the way that death is, that death works in the Western world, like when even before you get into, like, you're not even going into the soil, right? You're going into some kind of like entrapment made with wood that has been treated, and then your body's usually injected with a bunch of chemicals, right? So like we're probably like extremely toxic for the earth even after we die. So maybe back in the day, or maybe in places in which like death is not, you know, such a horrible process, maybe we would feed back the soil. But right now we're mostly, you know, just making it even worse. So also just thinking about that, there is really cool stuff happening too when it comes to death. There's folks that have been, and I really hope that this happens before I die. They're trying to figure out some kind of mushroom. It's like a mushroom, like looks like a sleeping bag. So they put the dead body in this mushroom thing, and then they kind of just like let the mushroom decompose your body, which is, I think, great. Also, folks are really interested on mushroom stuff, which we won't be able to get too much into it today. But I'm super beginner mushroom grower. You should definitely check out microremediation. So there's beautiful studies that are being made on how there are specific mushrooms that can heal land from oil spills, that can heal ocean from oil spills. There is also some mushrooms out there that folks are kind of like working with that can basically destroy plastic, right? Which is like one of the main issues of the modern world, right? Plastic and waste. So definitely check it out. I mean, mushrooms are honestly like, I've been so into mushrooms this pandemic season, because I feel like there's so much that we can learn from the way they grow, the way they communicate, the way they have sex. There's mushrooms out there that have like 3,000 different ways of having sex. Like it's like one of probably the most queer thing ever. So definitely like encourage folks to learn more about mushrooms. And also when it comes to medicine, a lot of us are going into mushroom medicine specifically for this pandemic times, because honestly, like medicinal mushrooms they're just like so packed with everything we need. Like a lot of them are really good to kind of like help us like immunomodulate. There's also like a good amount of mushrooms that are really good to kind of like support our nervous system. I've been like drinking reishi nonstop. I'm making some double extraction tinctures and water-based extractions with different types of mushrooms, because it's honestly like such good medicine. But also just the way that they grow, I think it's like the mycelium network is so similar to how mutual aid networks work. So I think it's just beautiful to kind of see this, this mutual aid just kind of like popping up, and so many people doing beautiful work, and also kind of learning that, it's so natural because the mycelium out under our feet, they're doing that all the time, right? So it's just like how natural it is for us to like support each other and create this networks of support and like mobilize resources. I think is super important, especially during this time, to understand that that's extremely natural. It's so natural that it's happening all the time, even under our own feet, right? Because mycelium, they live in the soil. Let me just go through it. Oh yeah, I wanted to just kind of show y'all this. Okay, so on the very far right, the reason why I showed this is the only picture that I have of my first garden. So I've had 3 gardens that I've lived in for like many years and I have worked with. This is the first home that I had when I moved to Los Angeles. I mean, I wish I could take the people out so you could see, the space that we were working with, but it was honestly like, it was like cement and some sand. The sand the cats of the neighborhood were using to basically poop and pee. That was kind of like their sandbox. And it was like dead soil. It was horrible. This is when I started gardening, right? So I was really into gardening and I was like, hey, how can I do this? How can I make this happen? And a lot of the stuff that I was kind of like looking for, like the books or the resources that I was, that I had access to, the library, because I had no money during this time. A lot of them require that I purchase stuff or that I invested money into healing soil. And I was like, I have absolutely no money. Like I can't even feed myself right now. Like, how am I going to do this? Right. So my gardening beginnings were based on basically working with whatever I had. Example, my menstrual blood, whatever I could think about. And this is kind of like what happened. And I think I lived in that place for like about 4 years. And this is just kind of like, the beginning, very beginning. You see, we put some cardboard on the bottom so the weeds wouldn't outgrow. Me trying to like figure things out, just using what I had access to. On the far right and the left, that's very beginnings of this gardening happening. We used a lot of the kind of like the car wheel. What's it called? The car wheels? No, the car. I always forget the name. What is the name of these things?
Tire.
The tire, yes, thank you. The tires, there was a tire shop right next to where we lived in Echo Park. So we basically went to this tire shop and we're like, hey, do you have any tires that you don't use anymore and can we have them? And they're like, yeah, go ahead, take them. I wouldn't recommend people growing stuff on tires because I'm pretty sure it's not probably the safest thing, but that's all I had. That's all I had. So I was like, I really need to grow food. I have no money to buy absolutely nothing else. I'm gonna just work with what I have. And you know, like as you can see, it looks kind of sad, but it's still working. You know, it's still at least doing something. I was able to grow watermelon in these tires. um, and then, you know, little by little, there you see, you know, starts kind of trying to pop up. We ended up putting more succulents on the sandy area, you know, and then you can see, you know, things are growing. Things are, you know, they're looking green. And then eventually this is what happened, right? So eventually, like, you get to learn how to work with the land in a way that you're like, okay, well, maybe you won't be able to grow here. Maybe this plant won't be able to do that well in this specific area or in this specific container, but maybe other plants would, right? So you start also learning what plants are growing abundantly. And you know, this is probably a couple of years after, and then, you know, we were able to grow so much food, right? There is native California sage there. There is a lettuce going to seed that's like fava beans. There's some basil in there. There is California sunflowers. There's amaranth. Like, honestly, like, there's kale somewhere in there. There's empansuchi. Like, in a tiny little space with absolutely nothing, we're able to probably grow around 30 to 40 different types of food and medicine, right? So, and it's incredible, right? Because it's like, wait, like, a lot of times we think that when we are healing soil, working with soil, we're kind of just like, you know, we need all of this access to things, but honestly, sometimes you can use very basic stuff. And I'm not gonna be able to go into all of it, but if you're interested, I do have the recording of the online workshop here. If you're interested, let me know. Just DM me and I can send it to you, but it's also in the link in my bio if you're interested in getting that. But this one, I love this slide because it's really thinking outside the box. Because sometimes people are like, well, I can't really grow in my garden. I don't have a garden. I don't really have any light in my house. Like, what do I do? There's ways that you can think outside the box, right? So for example, here in this picture right here, people just started a container garden in a tree outside, right? So this is beautiful. I think we should all be doing this. I actually want to start doing that. We recently we took over our sidewalk and we have 2 native California elderberries and 1, I think it's a loquat, that we planted, right? And then this is people just taking over and growing sunflowers, you know, because sometimes it's like we need to take public space and do this, right? Whenever I walk around and I see empty lots or when I see homes that have lawns and I'm just like, you can be growing so much stuff, I'm always just like, oh, how? Like, we need to really, as an entire species, we need to understand that we cannot just leave space to just be lawn, you know, like that could be where we grow food, where we grow medicine, where we grow, even if we don't eat the food, even if we don't eat those plants, that they can be food for other creatures that need that food, right? So I think it's also important for us to start being like resourceful and really thinking outside the box and like being like, okay, well, maybe I'm gonna take over this space, maybe I'm gonna take over this other space, maybe I'm gonna ask my friend that has access to a yard if I can start a garden there, right? There's just so many ways. Yeah, and this is us taking over the sidewalk and we planted this elderberry. And this is my friend who was leaving and they were like, oh, let me drop off some seedlings that I grew, but I'm leaving, so I don't want them to die, so they just gave it to me, right? So even just like figuring out how we can maybe like do that with each other, I think it's super important. Yeah, and also just when it comes to like DIY plant and garden tending, I think it's super important to kind of like create a space for us to be a part of it, because sometimes one of the big issues that people have when they start a garden or when they, you know, start to kind of connect with their little plantitas is that sometimes the way that they're positioned are not in an area that you're constantly seeing, right? So what we did, we got a hammock right in the middle of our garden, and our yard is tiny. Like, we live in Los Angeles, it's a tiny yard. Let me see if I can find it. No. Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about. So this, let me see if I can find a picture. So our yard is like, it's very tiny. Like this is the front yard. There's like a little bit of a side yard. Like I have containers growing, but it's not that big, right? And when we moved in, so this is our actual home like now that we live in right now. We moved in here a year ago, and the soil was so compacted that we had to do a bunch of like double digging stuff, feeding the soil. We had to do a bunch to kind of like get it going because it was so compacted, because I think that this person was parking their car in here, so like that compacts the soil horribly. It was a lot of work, but I basically took off an entire month to make this garden happen, because it's my work, right? I'm a gardener, I'm a seed saver, I'm an herbalist. I needed to make that happen. And I basically made a call out in my Instagram, and I was like, hey, are you interested in like learning how to grow food and learning how to grow your own corn? And then people like came through and they kind of like supported through that process and also learned while we were doing that. And basically do I even have a photo? Okay. Anyways, it was dead. This is us already working on it, right? But I've only been there a year. This is chapalote corn. It from being nothing, from literally looking like this all over, in like 4 months, and went to looking like that. And this is a year after. And I already have probably in there like hundreds of different types of plants, because I'm always throwing seed, right? So in a year, you can make an entire, honestly, not even a year, in 4 months, if you have the time, you can make a yard be a basic like food and medicine paradise. And I can guarantee you that, because I've done it. It requires some work, but it's also not that expensive. You can definitely work with what you have access to. I did not spend that much money doing this. Like I'm really much into like saving up money. This is chapalote corn that grew in my extremely compacted soil. Who knows when the last time that anybody grew anything in that soil was? Honestly, probably like, I don't know. Like I honestly don't even know. But this beautiful chapalote corn, who are also supposed to be one of the first corn ever grown, like in the world, chapalote corn. They grew in that yard. After we moved in, we worked on the soil and we planted it. And like after 7 months, we had these beautiful chapalote corns there. This is another example of how a little bit of the yard looked like after probably like 5 months. So it's totally doable. And I always like to share this with folks, because it's like, you know, it seems like a huge project, but it's totally doable to heal soil. And then when you heal soil, you get corn, you get amaranth, you get medicine, right? So that's the beautiful thing too about like healing soil, is that you actually get, it's probably the most, I mean, I don't want to put it in the terms of investment, but it's probably the most, it's probably the best investment you can do in your entire life. You know, even like more than like investing in like a high yield bank account. Invest on growing food, invest on seed saving, invest on growing plants, invest on learning how to grow plants and how to work with land, right? Like that's what we should be investing on, because this is like the technology that's going to actually like last forever. You know, Instagram can crash today, but seeds are the most reliable technology. There are seeds that have been buried for like thousands of years that people were able to grow after thousands of years of finding a little seed in a pot, right? Like seeds are the technology that I will always kind of like 100% trust. And there's some pictures of amaranth and tobacco that grow in our garden. Very much, you know, like I also like to grow a lot of plants that are like traditional to the areas that I'm from in the world. So like where I'm from in the world, people eat a lot of amaranth, or we call it kiwicha, and then tobacco is also very important. This is tobacco from Puerto Rico. My partner is Puerto Rican. So I also like to grow plants that are culturally relevant to who I am. There's more corn pictures, because I love corn. I love corn. Oh my God, I love corn. This is another type of corn. My puppies are there too. Let me see what else. And then this is just kind of like a picture of the corns I grew in my second garden. We processed them into tamales with friends, right? So just like how beautiful it is to like actually get to eat your own like corn grown, the corn that you grew. It's not that hard to grow corn, and it's just I don't know, at least for me, it's very much like a cultural food. Where I'm from, people grow corn, right? A lot of folks from this entire so-called America have a deep connection with corn, and I definitely encourage people to grow corn, like good non-GMO ancient seed corn, because it's just probably one of the most beautiful things I've done. And also just the idea of really kind of falling in love with seed, with food, with traditional foods, I think is super important, especially for this day and age. This is a patch that I got from Entangled Roots Press, and it says "No system but the ecosystem." So really kind of just like falling in love with all of the things that are under attack by this is heteropatriarchy and capitalism, right? So that's kind of what it's been in my head a lot lately. Like, how do we fall in love with all of the things that are under attack by all of this, like basically terrorist organizations, the government, capitalism, all of that, police, military, all of that. So how do we fall in love with it so we like actually protect it, right? And how do we like invest ourselves so much into it that we actually like protect the land we live on, protect the water, right? Protect the mountains around us, protect the seeds, right? So it's really kind of a process of re-enchanting ourselves with all of these things that are needed for life, and kind of like trying to figure out how can we make space by de-enchanting ourselves, or like breaking up with all of these other systems and all of these other things that we don't need, right? So which I think it's beautiful to create that. And yeah, so if you have any questions, you can go ahead and type them up. Just wanted to share with y'all, if you're interested, I have a couple of classes coming up online. So one of them that people are really interested about is how to make your own menstrual pads. So if you're interested on how to hand stitch your own menstrual pads, or how to learn more about like menstruation, but like using reusable menstrual catching things, you can go ahead and go to my Instagram at Loba Loca shares, and then go to the link in bio, and then you'll get to it. And then the first 40 people that are part of this, part of like that registered to this specific online class, the first 40 people are on, it's a giveaway. So the giveaway is I'm gonna have like a free ticket of a free pass for an intensive class that I have on menstruation called Radically Unconsciously Menstruating, which is like a really long, beautiful, like online workshop platform that I've been working on for like 5 years, where I basically talk about menstruation, but from a very kind of like queer, radical, anti-cis, heteropatriarchal lens, talk more about herbs for menstrual care, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, so if you are the first 40 people to sign up, you also get a chance to get a free ticket for this like huge like platform that is worth like around $350. So if you're interested, just make sure to register as soon as possible. Then if you want to learn more about this specific workshop that I talked about today, which is, I basically just went to just very fast into different slides. But if you're interested in having like the whole 2.5 hour recording of it, you can also go to my Instagram, link in bio, and then you'll find it. It's called Sprouting Gardeners, DIY Plant and Garden Tending for the Apocalypse. It was a sliding scale class. It started at $18, but this is the recording, so it's a set price. And then on the far right, I have Intro to Herbalism for the Apocalypse. So it's coming up next month, and it's a sliding scale starting at $18. And the first 40 people that register also get potentially an herbal kit. So I do giveaways for the first folks that register. And this one is going to be a great class if you're kind of like intro to herbal work. I'm going to be focusing on all of that, and like immunity support, nervous system support, and it's honestly like $18. So like get it before it's a recording, and then it's more expensive. It's also in the link in my bio. And yeah, if you have any questions, I'm gonna leave this out. So basically, lobaloca.com for my website. I do lots of bookings in universities. I can send you my press kit, and then also, you can check out my online store. I have some medicine there, and then check out my podcast. Honestly, it's free content, and people have been really loving it. And if you like what I talked about, I talk a lot about that in my podcast too. It's me and my partner. We both co-host it. But yeah, I don't know if there's any questions. I can't really read them. I don't know how to read them. So if there's any questions, maybe, oh, the chat. Okay, perfect. I can see it. Okay, somebody said name, please. My name is Loba. I go by Loba and they. Mutual aid, yes, mutual aid. A baby sent all of those emojis. How cute. Awesome. Oh yeah, and that's my Venmo too, at La Loba Loca. It's my Venmo. So if you enjoyed this little online class, yeah, you can tip me in Venmo. So if there's no other questions, I don't know, we have maybe like 3 more minutes. If people have any questions about anything I talked about today, you don't have to type it. Maybe you can just even unmute yourself. And then I'm gonna have I think the recording of this one, I'm going to see if I can get the recording. So I don't know if patrons are listening to this, but I have a Patreon. So it's basically a platform that I put a bunch of content that workshops that I do, the recordings of it, I put it in my Patreon, writings, a bunch of cool stuff. And it's as little as $1 a month. So if you're interested on my Patreon, you can also check that out on the link in my bio. But yeah, I don't think there's any questions.
I just want to say really quickly that I love the conversation you had about mutual aid and thinking about the way that like mutual aid is a natural process already and an ancient process. I really appreciate that framing. Thank you, Loba, you're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Sorry for being late. Oh my God, I was sleeping, half sleeping. Okay, pues. Take care, everyone. Nice talking to you and hope you have a beautiful day.